Welcome to the Watson Institute, and I wanted to first of all thank the Saxena Center and the Climate Solutions Lab who brought our guest Mizan Khan, who's going to speak today. My name is Timmons Roberts. I'm a professor in environmental studies and sociology. I have a thing called the Climate and Development Lab, which is very confusing with the Climate Solutions Lab. So I've known Mizan a long time, and that's why I wanted to get started, because I'm going to talk way too long, and I'll try to make this very quick. I was introduced to Mizan about 13 years ago at the UN climate negotiations. I'm not even sure where they were. It was in the back.
I remember.
It was in Cancun. I thought maybe in the back of some huge ballroom. And we were introduced by a wonderful man named Salim Hook, who was the head of the International Center for Climate Change and Development. And Salim was sort of the guiding light of my research lab. He would say, it would be great if we had some research about this. And I would say, okay, let's figure out how we can do it. And Salim was very intent that I meet Mizan. Because he saw a real opportunity for us to work together. Mizan is a very senior academic in Bangladesh. He was, 23 years he's been negotiating for Bangladesh at the UN climate talks, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. I brought him to Brown for a year back in 2012, where he was an affiliate of my Climate and Development Lab. And in that time, we finished a book called Power in a Warming World, MIT Press, Mizan and myself and Dave Siplet. And we locked ourselves in a room for a few days to do some scenario building on what happens, what are the likely climate futures. And I still think that was very exciting. And over time, he's worked with what I call the CDL All-Stars, our Climate and Development Lab, group of alumni, former PhD students, current PhD students. I'm pointing at Ike Uri back here, and former postdoctoral research fellows. We've co-authored 12 articles now and 2 books. So anyway, Mizan is extremely productive. His other book is about capacity building in the Paris Agreement. He's just an amazing collaborator. He got his PhD at the University of Maryland in public policy. But what I think is kind of quirky and fun is that in 1979, he went to Moscow and studied in the Soviet university called the People's Friendship University of Patrice Lumumba, which was set up by the Soviet government for bringing developing countries, scholars, young people to study in Russia. So he's seen the two extremes of capitalism and socialism, or state socialism, and as he says, he's lived other places in between in Europe and so on. He was at the North-South University in Dhaka in Bangladesh, and then he became the associate director at ICAD, the International Center for Climate Change and Development. He's also been the least developed countries expert group representative and leader. I don't know if I have this all right. He's been on the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, as a lead author. He's worked with the United Nations Environment Program as a coordinating lead author for their book called The Global Environment. What's it called? Outlook. Yeah. He's, for this year's COP, the climate negotiations, coming up in just about a month. He's the science panel board member, and he'll be going for 3 weeks as well. But again, he now heads a group called LUC, or the Least Developed Countries University
Consortium on Climate Change.
It's a consortium on climate change. So it's a capacity building initiative for universities across the developing world. Really exciting. So thank you for coming, Mizan. I look forward to hearing what you have to say. And so I'm going to cut him off at 30 minutes. I said 35 earlier, but I'm going to try to cut him off at 30 so we have lots of time for questions and discussion. So join me in welcoming Mizan Khan.
Thank you. Nice to meet you all. This building is very familiar with me. I spent almost 3 or 4 semesters here, starting from 2012, as Timmons has mentioned. I have written 3 books, mostly staying here. First one on 2014. It was single authored by me on adaptation politics. Second one was Timmons and David, PhD student working with us. And the third one was on capacity building, when I was in 2016 stationed here in this building, worked. So let me introduce my daughter, our lone child, Farhana Khan, an MIT graduate. And that what made me closer to also Providence, because in Boston, she has spent about quite a few years, and she also works there as an IT, but full-time from home. But she came to me with me today to enjoy this gathering, because in IT, she works mostly with numbers and data, which she enjoys not much, though she's very highly paid, but she's not enjoying her job anyway. So the materials that I wanted to share with you kind of covers the teaching for the whole semester. As Timmons has mentioned, I had been a negotiator for the last 23 years, starting from 2001. And this time also I'm going to Baku as a member of our delegation, and also as a council member of the COP29 presidency. So the topic that I wanted to share is about this intractability. For the almost last 30 years, we have been these negotiations starting back from 1990, when convention even was not adopted. INC, Initial Intergovernmental Negotiations, but not much progress we are having. So these are the issues that I wanted to share, but I will be going sometimes very quick, like supersonic. So please bear with me, but as young, your eyes are very sharper than mine, certainly, so try to look at very quick on the. So this dysfunctional world order we are living in, and then contribution to climate change and the solutions needed, which I will have just kind of a quick rundown. Basic provisions of climate change of the convention, then Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement, then temporal dimension had 2 intractable elements that I'm sharing with you. One is the temporal dimension of climate change, which causes a disconnect between the cause and effect of climate change, and the other one is the spatial disconnect, because the main sufferers suffer less, main causes of the problem suffer less, and the main sufferers have got not much resources to cope with, and they are the frontline victims. Okay, and then economics and finance of those mitigation and adaptation, and some ways forward. So look at this. Climate diplomacy has been pushed to the sidelines because of these wars, because wars are viewed as issues of high politics. Though climate change has moved to the level of high politics, but climate because of wars, and there are new relationships. For example, because of this Ukraine-Russia war, Moscow, Beijing has got ever stronger relationships, which they never had been. And also within Europe, there are fissures about these wars. And with the potential victory of Trump, you can imagine you have lived with Trump for 4 years previously. So you know what will happen to the world of political order globally, as well as in geopolitical terms, if Trump comes to power. There is likelihood that he will come to power. This is my hunch. I believe he will again be re-elected. I'm not sure. But as a foreign student observing US politics, I have a strong sense of feeling that he is likely to win for the second time. But this will be not kind of a very good thing that as a foreigner who's I take America as my second home, starting from my graduate years in College Park campus, starting from 1992. And my daughter's home now in America. And Boston, I view as kind of the most gentleman's area in the whole of United States. That is why, though her husband lives in Georgia, she prefers to buy a property here in Boston and stay and force her husband to come and join me. So, and then the central paradox of climate crisis, as I have already shared, that there is this disconnect between the sufferings and the ability to take care of that sufferings to a large extent. And then we are living in an increasingly financialized world, which is awash with liquidity. But money does not flow to the right sectors and the right areas that need real support and productive investments. And then climate regime has been established under this neoliberal market system. And under Article 3, 4.3 and 4.4, we are supposed to promote this market neoliberal system. But the basic contradiction is what you learn in the classes, what we teach you students in the class is not practiced in the outer world of diplomacy. This is a very serious contradiction. And I'm very frustrated as a teacher, because the fundamental issue of climate change is the greatest market failure. And in the neoclassical economics, we have taught students that the cardinal solution of that market failure is to internalize the externality. Otherwise, markets will be distorted. And Adam Smith's lessons were not that what we practice, which I will detail a little more in future in the coming slides. And this system de-emphasizes public responsibility and re-emphasizes private sector role. But private sector does not take care much about the public goods because they are up for profits. And so they don't invest in where benefits are not exclusive. This is the tragedy of climate change, which faces a tragedy of the typical case of the tragedy of the commons. Okay. And then we live in an increasingly flat world. You might have read many years back, about 15, 17 or 16 years back, about Thomas Friedman's book about the world is flat. And now we are having so much interconnectedness. Now, then all this Instagram, Facebook, and all the social media are not there. So we live kind of what I call in a weird world, W-I-R-E-D, weird world, So, but still, climate change is not, climate diplomacy is not responding to, it is being dealt with in the typical way as other global diplomatic issues are being dealt with. This is the problem. Okay. So, the Chinese leadership, for example, in renewable energy, invites Western protectionism. China has got a paradox in the sense they are the leader in renewable energy, but again they are the leader in fossil fuel burning. Okay, and Western world now, because of the geoeconomics and competition, is imposing restrictions on electric cars, for example, as the number one producer, and also other parts, processed metal parts to produce all those cars. So UN Secretary General calls this world a dysfunctional world order that we live, which is unfit for solving the global commons problems like climate change. Okay. So just very quick contribution to the problem. You see, historically, America had been historically the largest emitter, but now the second, and China has come up. China in 1992 emitted 1/6 of that of US. But now China emits more than double, even more than 30%, or almost 1/3 now. So because of rapid development of China for the last 3 weeks. And then the cumulative share historically, still America contributes more than 27% of, but China 11%. And European Union and all other countries. So in convention, there is the Article 3, which talks of historical contributions, but developed countries don't agree to that much. They have their arguments, and Global South also have our arguments, but developed countries agree to respective capabilities, that they are more developed, so they are supposed to support us more. But that support is also peanuts, really, compared to, and Timmons, my co-authors in many articles, we have published a lot about this. Okay. And then per capita also, there is a great injustice in per capita emissions, for example. Okay, this global commons is about everybody's property, not someone should have ethically and legally also, but we don't have that legal system here, that some citizens will enjoy more rights than others. But here is a huge kind of discrepancy, disparity in per capita emissions. India is in the most difficult, any Indian student here? India is in the most difficult situation in climate diplomacy. Because having 1.4 billion population, still few hundred million population having no access to modern energy, but they depend on coal and fossil fuels, but they are asked now to transition away from fossil fuels, and India has to do it for the global welfare. But India is in a very difficult position with the lowest kind of per capita among the G20 countries per capita emissions. Okay. And now these are the solutions that you need. I'm not going to look at 30 seconds to the seconds. Main solution is fossil fuel, transition from fossil fuels, because fossil fuel emissions contribute to more than almost about 2/3. Okay. And then CH4 and all those others. So aviation also is a big factor. I argue as a negotiator that so much emissions we do, attending so many meetings. After coming to America in late June, early July, I had to travel to Africa and also to 3-4 countries in Africa during these months, and next month again we'll go to Baku. But what is the end result? I'm frustrated as a negotiator. I call these negotiations a kind of process of active inaction. This is the expression that I have used in my first book. Whole negotiations are a process of active inaction. It's a procrastination process. Okay, so climate change regime, here also I will spend just 1 minute, because you know all this as students of at Watson, as well as also from Timon's lab and Solutions lab. UNFCCC adopted in 1992, and you know the basic provisions. Okay. Voluntary responsibility given to the developed countries to lead, and then but important is for us the Article 3.3, common but differentiated responsibility based on respective capability. So the problem is common, but the responsibility is differential. Okay, because of the implied historical emissions, all those. And respective capability is understood well. Okay, and then Kyoto Protocol, Article 4.3 and 4.4 are very important for the Global South, because under those provisions, developed countries have assumed obligatory responsibility with the language shall provide support. Obligatory responsibilities to support. And under Article 4.4, also for adaptation, full support for adaptation. And there are 4 principles agreed for climate finance: new and additional, adequate, and predictable. Okay, but constructed ambiguity as a resource is applied, so that they are not followed through. And then Kyoto Protocol, America did not join Kyoto Protocol because of non-participation of India and China, and because of the fear of losing competitiveness in international trade and all those. So Kyoto Protocol was not a success story. It was in the deathbed, because America is the factor in global diplomacy as the lone superpower still, and now maybe the second emitter, but then it was the first emitter. So once America didn't join, Kyoto Protocol was put kind of in hospital, and then in the last years in the intensive care, and it's dying now. It will exit, And then the emission obligatory responsibility of emissions was under the Kyoto Protocol by the developed countries, Annex 1, then called Annex 1 countries, and developing countries didn't have that obligation. And then non-Annex 1 countries exempted all those. And emissions trading under CDM, I mentioned here just about CDM. There are also emissions trading under Article 6 and Article 12, but those were between developed countries. But CDM also was not very successful because some countries dominated, 3 or 4 countries, including China. And there were some manipulations also in terms of gases, which I think Rwanda agreement few years back plugged that loop, kind of, HFC, about HFC.
You've got an error. Paris Agreement was 2015, Lisa.
Oh, sorry. Because the 2015, yes, this is absolutely my typo. Okay. I attended also the, yes, thank you. So it's a Paris Agreement is a quasi-legal kind of document. And there is a history, Timals, and many of you knows very well why it is called agreement. Because Kyoto Protocol, America is kind of had always been very careful not to be a party to any outfit, international outfit, which is viewed kind of as erosive of its sovereignty. You can think of the history, League of Nations. A great statesman like Wilson was the brainchild of League of Nations during the ongoing, at the end of the First World War. But then, after League of Nations was drafted and everything, American Senate did not ratify. So America viewed always kind of being a party to an international outfit as erosive of its independence of action. That also was reflected in the Kyoto Protocol. Okay, and the Paris Agreement at the suggestion of Barack Obama, the document was called agreement because some agreement can bypass the Senate and get ratified directly by the president's signature. That was, but now the tragedy was once Trump came in, he again would do, and I don't know what in future, next year, or by end of this year will happen. But let us always hope for the best. Okay. So this is about, and financial mechanisms. Paris Agreement was a gentleman's agreement, because only procedural aspects are obligatory. In the sense, every 5 years there will be kind of a global stocktake, and each and every country has to submit their national communications. These are fine, but the substantive provision of cardinal solution to the problem, reduction of greenhouse gases, has been left to voluntary nature based on the self-differentiation. So I call this purely a gentleman's agreement. But what happens with a gentleman's agreement? It works only when each and every individual or every party to that outfit is a gentleman. But in international diplomacy, that happens rarely. Look at Kyoto Protocol. Russia, Canada, and Japan was party to the Kyoto Protocol. But in 2010, by 2012, we are supposed to have the second kind of agreement or pact or extension of Kyoto Protocol, whatever is. But then when in 2010 they saw that they are not, they are very far even from compliance, then they just walked out. Sorry to say, like children's play, because as a professor, I speak always my mind. Here I'm not talking about a negotiator. Okay. So it was like a children's play. I don't like you, or I could not comply, keep my promise, so I'm walking out without any kind of return obligation or something. Anyway, okay. So this is kind of, I'm not going to explain everything. It's a fractured world. We live in a fractured world, There are broad groupings between global north and global south, but within global north, there is the umbrella group, which are non-EU countries, European Union, and there is the Environmental Integrity Group, which combines Switzerland links and also Mexico and Liechtenstein and another two, South Korea. They kind of try to serve as bridge builder, between them and between these two developed country parties. And all those, there are many splinter groups, starting from 2000 for the last 23 years. There had been more and more splinter groups. You have to have a look at. If you have any questions, we can discuss in details later. Okay. So this temporal disconnect between cause and effect. Climate change is kind of a stock problem. not a flow problem. So it's a longer term. This year's flow does not immediately impact. After 20, 30 years, they will have the stock enough to impact. But historical, because of the antecedent deposition of greenhouse gas emissions for the last 200 years, we are having already the ratchet effect. And even if, assuming hypothetically that the world stops breathing with zero emissions, still there will be a need for adaptation for the next 20, 30 years because of this ratchet effect of the accumulated emissions already in the atmosphere. Okay. And that is why that is a problem, because we human beings and our economies respond to day-to-day immediate concerns. Okay. And then there are anti-climate change politics. Political cycles also do not match with this longer-term problem, because political cycles run on 4 or 5 years. In America, 4 years. In our countries, 5 years. And in many other countries, 4 to 5 years. So politicians' target is to show some immediate result, because he wants to get reelected. Maybe not this time just as an MP, next time as a minister. So he wants to show projects, show things, output, concrete outputs, outcomes. That climate change does not give in to that kind of policy making. And a distant problem. And yesterday's accumulated emissions of developed countries are mixed with today's very, very rapidly growing emissions from developing countries, and for right and justifiable reasons to some extent, because our basic needs are not satisfied. As I mentioned, India's 200 to 300 million population still don't have access to modern latest electricity, for example. So we have to burn, energy to generate electricity. Okay, 5 minutes. Oh, so many. Okay. So this is the temporal. So our investment economic system does not allow investment for longer term problems. Because as economic system, our decision making is based on the net present value concept. Because of the time value of money. So this is a problem, and mitigation is a global public good. But investment does not happen. And because there is the free rider problem, as well as non-participation, and some countries view costs to be higher than the benefits. So investment does not happen for mitigation even. And then there's a special disconnect, because the sufferings are distant. Distant people suffer much more. Those who cause the problem mainly suffer less, and they have better adaptive capacity and technology. Just look at the example. I'm not telling anything bad about that. In Central European flood, about 2 weeks back, I think, there was an instant offer of $10 billion assistance. Okay, this is fine, because they are your people. And always, we human beings, including myself, we value the immediate ones first. But when the developed world have assumed, countries have assumed a responsibility with obligation, legal obligation, then climate finance should be scaled much better. $100 billion, for example, started this number back in 2009. What is left of if we adjust inflation with that during these 13 years? But still, this number is assumed to be achieved just this year. Okay, I will talk about that. Okay, so trillions are invested in military security, perceived security I call, because military manufacture those threats only to maintain their budgetary clout in all the global economies, not just in America, but in also developing countries, in a low-income, poor countries. Also, military is very powerful. Okay, but they manufacture threats only. But climate change is a real threat, existential threat, because we are having already run just Helen. You look at the condition of Helen. My daughter's house in Florida, she was lucky she was in Boston. A big tree fell on her bedroom and her roof crushed. So this is the problem. And there is also this debt problem, climate debt problem. Whatever little climate finance we get, mostly in mitigation, less in adaptation, less than 1/4 in adaptation, but that is also as loans. So we have a climate debt trap. Already many developing countries are in debt trap, and this exacerbates this problem. Anyway, so adaptation, victim of spatial disconnect, as I already mentioned, because sufferings are more there, so there is less sympathy, less empathy, and that is why those countries suffer more. Here is an economic, as a professor, as I mentioned. Here we look at, there is a contradiction. Mitigation is a global public good, but the need for which mitigation is needed to address climate change impacts are not regarded as a global public good. Adaptation is not regarded as a global public good, which I argued in my first book that was single authored, published in 2014 by Routledge from London first and then New York in 2015. Argued this sole argument focuses about this idea, that adaptation should be considered as a global public good. Because if more than 100 countries, including countries like India and Pakistan, India has got 1.4 billion population, but it's still a low-income country. So if countries like India, Pakistan, Nicaragua, Bangladesh also is a more than $500 billion economy with 170 million population, if go down underwater, then whole global economic, political, security system will be impaired. So we need to expand our simultaneous definition of global public goods that are only non-excludable and non-rival, because it's a social construct. So definition of those social categories should evolve responding to the social concerns and social needs. Okay. And then, yes, climate finance provided, just these are absolute amounts, but manipulated accounting. We have published about that. This discrepancy in reported adaptation finance, you can see. Reported finance, that Global South believes more in Oxfam reports. Okay, yeah. So you can see the discrepancy, for example, in the figure. And then correlation, this is another double, triple injustice. There is no or almost poor correlation between vulnerability and actual delivery of climate finance. You can look at the left side. Most of the poor countries, vulnerable countries, don't get much money about. So this is the last slide. Okay. So I think 2 minutes more. You can. Right. Okay. This is the last slide. So our political system is still, hangs on this past Westphalian model of 1648 world European when the state system was formalized, But now we live in an interdependent, weird world, So we need to look at cooperation as a positive, some win-win game. I read Joseph Nye's book. He argued, Harvard professor, very strongly about this, that what kind of a world we live in. So there's a persistent gap in science and policy. Here is an argument for the students and young generation. Because we need a stronger youth movement, because we, the older generation, should be shunted out from the negotiation halls, because we are failing, absolute failure, this older generation negotiator. So young generation needs to read a very strong movement, but you can raise a movement once you are instilled with ideas and passion, and that passion should come from your education system. But her education system is not very good. I always, as a student of American education, product of American education, I always praise for American education in terms of scientific and technical skills and knowledge. Superb. Highest research is done in America, basic research. But here, social science, particularly ethical, moral education is very weak. Very weak. So we need to go beyond the rational actor model, because we human beings are not just self-interest, pot of self-interest. We have altruistic genes, because human beings are the best creations of God. Okay, so we not just my individual welfare should be a concern of a human being. We need to look a bit beyond my physical existence, my comfort zone. Okay, that education is missing in America and in the Western world, but in the Eastern world still we have that. But because of the Western and global impact, also that values we are likely to lose. But Adam Smith, I want to finish with this. I'm a very great advocate of Adam Smith's lessons, and I respect very much. Adam Smith's book we read as economics students, master's students, Wealth of Nations, the classic, Invisible Hand. But his argument are two lessons of Adam Smith I will share. One is his invisible hand. He was against government intervention. That invisible hand of the market in terms of demand and supply will work as kind of a cybernetic method to correct mistakes. Government intervention is not needed. But only under condition that those economic agents behave ethically and morally. Otherwise, perfect competition will not stay. What is economic system? Neoliberal market system. It's a market system, and market system means perfect competition. But that is not there. Only manipulation and manipulation. During the COVID years, we have more than double the number of billionaires. So what kind of an economic system we live in? What kind of a political system? Because of energy price hikes and food price, where people suffered, the number of billionaires has been doubled. This is a contradiction of the economic system. And then his second lesson, and then this jurisprudence, Adam Smith argued that if economic agents don't behave that way, then they must be taken under court. Okay, but that is not there. And the second lesson that he argued is about this indivisibility of interests. That interests at personal, individual, or national levels are indivisible. We cannot promote our own interests if not, because our both sorrows and happiness infect others. So, but this is not the world that we live in. So, this is what I will request to read at least, that was Winston Churchill's statement many years back in 1936, when the German aggression was not initiated to be registered or something like that. They were wavering. Then he made a statement in the parliament, which is still valid for today's climate negotiations. But this is more valid. This is the FDR, the greatest statesman of America. He made it in 1944 at the Bretton Woods Conference. That economic diseases are very infectious. They infect one country after another. So we need to take care and address problems collectively. Okay. Thank you very much.
Mizan, I'm going to sit up here and we'll take some questions. I don't know where you want to be. You can sit or you can stand up.
Yeah, I'm better as a teacher. 3 hours I don't sit.
Yeah.
While I take class.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hello, my name is Angela. First of all, Professor, thank you so much for coming today. I cannot agree more with everything that you said, every single thing, especially talking about our inaction when it comes to the climate diplomacy, since I study it. So I thought I'd give a little bit of background because I don't have a super clear question for you. I just want your thoughts on what I'm thinking. So I really agree with you when you say that in terms of Western academia, that our scientific capacity, our technological capacity is quite great. But I'm really frustrated, especially studying environmental science in the US, because it seems to me, my professors, they don't make the distinction between the global south. Like they just think of the global south as one continuous contingency. Like they don't know the difference between Bangladesh. They don't know the difference between Bangladesh. They don't know the difference between Indonesia. They think of it all as one interconnected, sorry, I'm going to cry. But it's very frustrating because I come from Cambodia. So that's a country in which we suffer from flooding every single day, And so I'm just curious because it's really hard for me to continue wanting to study this, to continue in academia, when I feel that it's not really an issue of when we say we are moving too slowly. I don't think that we as the globe are moving too slowly. I see that, in Barbados, why do we not? The Bridgetown Initiative is a great initiative, right? I see that the African Climate Summit is doing great. Even the ADB, really actually does put in policies in place. It seems like it's literally just the West that is slow. So I guess I don't know if I have a question. I just am curious about your thoughts.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Cambodia is also with us, very suffering country victim.
Very big victim. Yeah.
So what do you think? Is it that the South should never be painted with one brush?
Exactly. But in terms of there is a contradiction also here.
Yeah.
For example, why these splinter groups came in, for example, the graph figure that I have shown. This
Yeah, it was just the G77 really.
G77,
in early.
we work under G77. We never contradict in our interventions.
Yeah.
Bangladesh will graduate soon next year from LDC status, Cambodia also.
Least developed countries.
Least developed country status. But we work under G77 broadly. But then it was viewed to be led by the developing country leaders, which did not take enough cognizance of the interests of countries like Cambodia or Bangladesh. So these splinter groups evolved. Now, we again need to be reunited. For example, the case is a loss and damage fund. Why loss and damage fund could be established? Because G77 was one in the demand for having this fund. That is why we may pursue our narrow group perspectives, but at the end of the day, if we want to achieve something, we need to be united. Otherwise, this time on climate finance, for example, on definition of climate finance, there is again a kind of rock solid unity this time. Because for the last 25 years, we are still not having a definition of climate finance. That is why $116 billion that we have seen is kind of not the number that we from the global south believe in. Yeah. Okay. Please.
Yes, please.
Hello, thank you so much for your talk. Incredibly insightful. Super interesting. I was just wondering, like you mentioned the kind of frustration that a lot of people have when it comes to like climate summits like COP. And I was just wondering about two things. First of all, what do you think should we look out for the next COP in Baku? And then second of all, what do you think would actually, or do you have any ideas on what could actually improve the efficiency or like I feel like what happens a lot at these COPs is that like discussions are somewhat dishonest. It seems like there's a lot of like parading around, but very little like actual discussion. And I'm wondering if you have any ideas on how to like improve that kind of space to make it an actual like discussion space.
Yeah, a very interesting question and very challenging question because this question is in the mind of every youth, I know. The tragedy of negotiations is that, sorry to say, bad boys are hosting these COPs. Bad boys in the sense that fossil fuel powers. Fossil fuel powers. So, Dubai hosted it. Poland, in the history of whole negotiations, is the country hosting 3 times COPs, a fossil fuel power. Now again, Azerbaijan, a small country but a fossil fuel power. That is a very negative point. And this time, I am a member of the Scientific Council. They are so restrictive about observer participation. An NGO or a research organization, university-based research organization, for example, if in last years used to get 2-3 batches, they are getting only 1 batch. Because
happened to Brown this year.
Exactly. Because Baku government is a very authoritarian government. All the Soviet communist, authoritarian communist, streaks still are maintained. That is why I'm not very optimistic about this COP. And NGO participation, CSO participation is very much restricted again this year. But quality matters. So if young generation with quality representation, with good knowledge, good articulation, good communication, can participate and they can make louder voice only. Because out of negotiation, not much will come. This year, 2 issues are likely to dominate the agenda. One is climate finance, another is Article 6 about emissions trading. that has to be completed this time. But about climate finance, I'm not very optimistic because of these wars and all those, and American floods and all those floods in other developed countries. So I'm not very optimistic, but you young generation
Wait, can you
must
talk
be
about
very militant about.
Can you talk about COP30 in Belém in Brazil? I mean, there's a whole different story, right? Or is it?
Yeah, there is will be some difference. You know, there is the now culture of Troika leadership. You know, COP28 leadership, COP29 leadership, and Belém, Brazil leadership. They have formed a Troika leadership, mutual consultation process. Belém COP is likely to be better and having better outcomes, I believe, only because Bolsonaro is not there anymore. A Trump's cousin. Okay. Now this time we have a Brazilian president. I read his books. He's a sociologist, very progressive, Lula, Professor Lula da Silva. So I'm a little more optimistic out because presidency matters. Host country perspective and how they guide the process matters very much. Okay.
Yes.
Hi, thank you very much. This was very interesting. I am a graduate student in DEEPS here at Brown, so I actually study climate change and I'm an oceanographer. And so seeing all of these from diplomacy level perspective is very interesting, but also at the same point frustrating because we have the data, all the information we need from the scientific point of view to know where we're going, in which direction we're going, but at the same time we see that the diplomacy and the politics is not doing much in terms of adapting and mitigating the climate change effects. And so I was wondering, especially when I look at the graph that you show about the interconnections of all the countries and the politics for all the organizations that talk about climate change and how to find solutions about that, I still see that an entanglement of politics done at a very a short-term level with the politics that is needed for solving climate change. And so I was wondering, since sometimes I think about this, the overall global politics as the one that is causing climate change, but also the one that is trying to solve climate change, but using the same identical economies that are the one that caused climate change. So if I think about this, I don't see that we could reach a solution if we still think in this way with the same mindset. And so I was wondering if there is another way to go beyond these distinctions of political regulations in the world, but find another way to find agreements that go beyond the politics.
Yeah, very good ideas. Yeah, yes. The main problem, there is a problem in economics, as I mentioned, that we need to look from economic perspective, investments to go for things that take care of our life support system. We need to be a little liberal, not to go through the net present value formula. Okay, so a kind of social discount rate, and that needs global agreement of the whole banking system to arrive at a social discount rate, which means very subsidized rate. And in then only, and application of the polluter pays principle. That is under, we teach at the class very much under neoclassical economics, internalization of externality. So if each and every country, if each and every company takes care of their pollution through instituting the full cost system, then the whole problem is solved. Okay, this is in economics. Then in politics, still we live. Climate vulnerability should be treated absolutely differently than any other global diplomatic issues like China, US relationship, or EU, transatlantic alliance, all those. Because here we have a real vulnerability interdependence. At the beginning, for example, 20 years back, developed countries were not suffering much. Developed countries like America or Europe did not face this frequency of climate events like floods. But now, you developed countries, citizens are not immune from. In Florida now, it's very difficult to buy insurance. Absolutely exorbitantly high insurance buying, in Florida now. And that will happen more and more because we already live in a 1.5 degree centigrade world. Already. Okay. That is why political leaders should be much more educated. There should be a kind of scientization of politics, what I can call. That politicians must understand the science, which is perfect already. Climate science is perfect. That is why we're young generation. That is why I look upon you only, not people like our oldies, because you have to force the negotiators not to get out of the room unless you give your agenda is agreed upon. That is why I agreed. The quality of youth leadership matters more, participation, with knowledge. There is no substitute to knowledge. Okay.
I'd be very curious to hear you say a bit more on the climate finance side. Where do you think the money should come from and what are the main obstacles for mobilizing it?
Yeah, this is the second most intractable issue. I call it now the first most intractable issue because there is kind of an alliance between the developing country measure emitters and the developed country measure emitters. Earlier, mitigation was the number one intractable agenda. But now, because of the alliance from both sides, they have built a strong friendship. And that is why it is now pushed to the second agenda. Climate finance, climate change is a public bad. Okay, so public goods are taken care of and provided mostly by the national governments, public authorities. Private sector, public-private partnerships happen. Okay, but public sector must take the lead role. And under Article 9.4, there is that provision that public sector has to take the lead. Okay, that is not there. Now, public sector alone cannot. As a long-time negotiator, lead negotiator of climate finance from Bangladesh, I argued that public finance will never suffice. Never suffice. Compared to the needs, it will be peanuts. Public. So we need other public support systems, extra budgetary resources, what I call. What is extra budgetary? For example, this time America had got this Helen. Huge destructions. America is likely to reduce your ODA, foreign aid, as well as climate finance support. We cannot do anything about that. That is why public finance should not be dependent only on the expediency of the public treasury. Okay, we should think of international public support system. For example, aviation levy. We have submitted an article for publication to a journal where we have argued for a little aviation levy. The idea was mooted back in 2008 and submitted as a proposal from the LDC side, but then it was not accepted. But during the last 15 years, global income has gone up on average, and then solidarity sense also, I believe, has gone up. So this time it may succeed. We need to have extra budgetary public finance, like a little fraction of $2.2 trillion on defense military budget a year, or financial transaction tax. About $3 or $4 trillion are transacted each day, just at the push of the buttons. So if a little fraction of 1% is charged to that rolling money, we can have billions of dollars, because Treasury will never will come with adequate support. That is why, and there are lots of, for example, this time G77 has initiated the idea of putting a little levy on fashion industry, which is also a big emitter now, because our income is going up, so we are going for more and more the latest fashion in terms of food, Okay, so that military budget, financial transaction tax, aviation, bunker fuel, already there is an agreement, Timon, you know. There is already an agreement about shipping, little levy on shipping, okay, by the shipping industry. But still they don't agree to part of that revenue for adaptation in developing countries. They are still up for investing that money for decarbonization of aviation, of maritime transport, you know. So this is, but things are moving a little higher. But climate finance and about private sector. Private sector is the problem of climate change, causing the problem. And again, they are the solution, I believe. Okay, because more than 90% of global product is supplied by the private sector. But we cannot leave private sector to lead, because they will never lead. What I call Wall Streetification of climate finance is happening. But they will invest in where there is only profit. Okay. And that is why I always argue that there should be a corporate social responsibility imposed legally binding, some imposition of a 5%, for example, gross profit or net profit, 5% or 2%, globally agreed. Okay, then that corporate social responsibility money should not be left in their hands to spend, because they will spend then through advertising of some good food or something, showing greenwashing kind of. Okay, because Adam Smith's principle we are not following. We are not ethical agents. We are not serving as ethical agents. Had that been the case, then this problem would have long been solved. Okay, that is why private sector must play a complementary role. But there is kind of an initiative from the developed country parties to put private sector up front. Okay, which Global South is not accepting and will not accept.
Well, I'm going to take two more, and then we're going to.
Sorry. I think you. Oh, sorry.
That's all
should
right.
I go?
No, that's fine. And then we'll go back.
Wait. So in your talk, you mentioned a lot of hope for the youth and also kind of not hope for these entrenched authority figures in government. And so, I mean, you're coming from Bangladesh where there's just a mass-led youth revolution overthrowing one of these authority figures. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that and what kind of those in the global north can learn from this movement. Because I think also you talk about an issue where whatever happens in the global south, ultimately, because the global north has so much power that it's very difficult for them to lead. So, yeah, if you could talk a little about that.
About Bangladesh, yeah. You might have heard about Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, who was the daughter of the founding father of Bangladesh. She was a very active diplomat at the highest level on climate change, on environmental diplomacy, and she had awards also on that. Okay, she was a very great advocate of climate-induced displacement, because Bangladesh is a very heavily populated country. But because of kind of not so good governance and power corrupts, there is the saying, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So that happened. So she had very wide popular base, number one party in terms of popular support. But human nature wants some change. This is built in each and every human being. Already 15, 16, 17 years ago, she was running the show. And people and elections were not very open. Okay, not very transparent. Some kind of manipulations happened. And the young generation did not like it. The first-time voters, for the last 10 years, a significant Bangladesh still is a youthful nation, kind of, though our average age is now 73 years. Youthful nation. So those who could not vote had pent-up anger, dormant anger. And once they got the chance, they all came out into the street and moved this hugely powerful regime. But this new interim government also is very good in the sense that Dr. Muhammad Yunus, he's a famous global leader, and an excellent friend of America, personal friends of Bill Clinton and his wife. He visited New York. You might have seen some photos. He met about 15 global leaders. So he has got great international image, But Aomi League, the regime that is ousted, again will come. Maybe not this 5 years, next 5 years, but after, because they have a strong political support. But his own supporters were also a little disenchanted, what I call it, disenfranchised, because it is some kind of, when a regime continues for longer years, more than 2 terms. That is why American system I like very much. No more than 2 terms as a president. Because then kleptocratic institutions and kleptocracy develops. This crony capitalism develops.
Mizan, has your direction as a climate negotiator changed under the new government?
No, that will not change. Not just climate change, other environmental issues. That is non-political, and Bangladesh is absolutely an environmentally predicated country. We are the frontline victims. Okay, we are the ground zero of vulnerability. I use these terms also in my book. Bangladesh is the ground zero of vulnerability. So our environmental diplomacy will not change. It is above politics of every regime. So, okay.
One more.
Yeah, so I guess that's the last question. So first, thank you so much for your insights. It's super interesting. And I also really like your opinion sounds like how ambiguous the entire climate finance landscape is. And that's sort of like a follow-up to Matea's question on climate finance. So I think recently, there has been a rise on all this renewable investment and technology transfer from other global south countries, not only China and India, to other places in global south, especially Africa or Southeast Asia. So although sometimes the landscape can be a little bit contentious given all the human rights abuses and other things. So I wonder what's your opinions on the futures of this kind of global south collaboration, technology transfer, or direct financing to have more impacts on the climate landscape? Thank you.
Yes, a very good observation. Sure. In terms of global South-South cooperation, we are now quite strong. Okay, because in the global South, there are a number of countries which are industrializing. I will not call them industrialized, but industrializing and at a higher level. So they have good technologies. So South-South cooperation is welcome more by other southern countries. Okay, this is one thing. Another thing is adaptation technology. We don't need to import much from the developed world, because adaptation technology, global South is very rich in terms of hard adaptation technology, also because of the geographical context and the geographical location-based technology used for ages. And also our people have got indigenous, local knowledge-based adaptation technology. That is very, very important. And now there is increasing research on that, of a sustainable marriage between conventional science, modern science, and also local science. And many of the research that I have read could not disprove the indigenous practices that they have been doing for centuries. Okay, so these modern scientists, working at Brown University or MIT lab, they are coming to terms with those non-formally educated people. And in terms of South-South cooperation, climate finance, under Article 9, there are 3 2 groups of countries. 9.1, under 9.1, only developed countries having obligatory responsibility, and under 9.2 provision that other countries in a position to do so should support. And developed countries have got an argument that more than 50 developing countries have per capita income much more than the poorest developed countries. So other countries should come up. We from the low-income countries are not against this, but we cannot, in the global South, we cannot say this, because we negotiate as group. But for example, Dubai has proposed $100 million, which is peanut for them. but still at the beginning. China, for example, has got the Global South Solidarity Fund of over $4 billion now. Okay, and China has got huge money. So from another developing country like Bangladesh, we welcome China's much more support for climate change. During the last decade, I know China has provided about $45 billion of climate finance. But China's climate finance, still we don't go and get the granular figures. Western figures also are not totally granular as we expect. And we have written about that with 3 months. We have published also on that. But China's still data are still not a little more fishy than the developed country data. Okay.
Is that a good place for us to stop? Please feel free to come up and talk to Mizan afterwards. He can maybe let you know how you could connect with him in the future. Thank you so much, Mizan. That was great.